Do you ever wonder if you're related to an ancient Egyptian pharaoh? What if I told you that somewhere out there in the world, your DNA could hold the key to solving one of history's greatest mysteries? The pharaohs were some of the most powerful people to have ever lived. They ruled over Egypt for thousands of years, and they were considered to be living gods. But what happened to their bloodline? Where are the descendants of the pharaohs today? In this video, we'll take a journey across genetics, history, and myth to find out. So, stay tuned. Welcome back to my channel. Let me explain the situation here. The pharaohs were the rulers of Egypt during a time period known as the Old Kingdom, which lasted from around 2680 to 2180 BC. During this time, Egypt was divided into several different kingdoms, each ruled by a pharaoh who was considered to be a god in human form. The Old Kingdom is also when the pyramids were built, so you know it must have been pretty glorious. During the Old Kingdom, there were 5 main dynasties of pharaohs, with each dynasty ending in the death of the last male heir. When this happened, the crown would pass to a new pharaoh from a different bloodline. For example, the first dynasty ended with King Unas, and then the second dynasty began with King Khufu. This pattern continued until the 6th dynasty ended in 2180 BC, but that wasn't the end of the story. There was a period of instability known as the First Intermediate Period, which lasted until 2055 BC, when the 11th dynasty began with Mentuhotep II, who reunified Egypt and established a new capital at Thebes. This ushered in a period of stability and prosperity known as the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom came to an end around 1780 BC after the invasion of the Hyksos, a foreign people who seized control of Egypt and established the 15th dynasty. However, the Egyptians were able to fight back and drive the Hyksos out of Egypt, leading to the establishment of the 16th dynasty and the start of the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom was a golden age for Egypt, lasting from 1543 to 1292 BC. It was during this time that Egypt became a true superpower, conquering Nubia, Syria, and Palestine. Some of the most famous pharaohs of all time ruled during the New Kingdom, including Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramses II, and Tut. The New Kingdom came to an end when Egypt was invaded by the Libyans, who established the 22nd dynasty. Egypt continued to be ruled by various foreign powers, such as the Assyrians, Persians, and Ptolemies, until it was conquered by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. After Alexander's death, Egypt became part of the Ptolemaic Kingdom, which lasted until 30 BC when it was annexed by the Roman Empire. And that's where our story of ancient Egypt ends. Now, do you remember me saying that the pharaohs were considered to be living gods? Well, let's take a closer look at that. The ancient Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were descended from gods and were, in fact, gods themselves. They believed that the pharaoh had a divine right to rule and that he was responsible for maintaining order in the world. The pharaoh was also seen as the intermediary between the gods and the people. He was the one who kept the gods happy and made sure that they continued to bless Egypt. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was immortal, and that when he died, his body would be preserved through the process of mummification so that his soul could live on. The pharaoh's tomb was filled with treasures and provisions, so that he would have everything he needed in the afterlife. So the ancient Egyptians clearly believed that the pharaohs were special. But what did these beliefs have to do with their family trees? Well, the answer lies in something called the royal bloodline. A royal bloodline is simply the lineage of a king or queen. It's the line of succession that determines who will inherit the throne when the current ruler dies. In the case of the pharaohs, their royal bloodline was believed to be pure because they were gods. It was important that the pharaohs marry within their own family to keep the bloodline pure and to ensure that the next pharaoh would also be a god. This practice is known as consanguineous marriage, and it was common among the pharaohs of Egypt. For example, King Tutankhamun married his sister Ankhesenamun, and King Ramses II married his daughter, Princess Iset. This brings us to the core mystery of this video. If the pharaohs were gods and their bloodline was pure, why did their families fade into history? Where are the descendants of the pharaohs today? There are a few possible explanations for why the pharaohs' families faded into history. One theory is that the royal bloodline was deliberately wiped out by the Egyptians' enemies. For example, when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, he killed many of the Egyptian nobles, including any potential heirs to the throne. Another theory is that the royal bloodline simply died out due to a lack of genetic diversity. As we mentioned earlier, the pharaohs often married their relatives, and this inbreeding eventually led to the extinction of the royal bloodline. Finally, it's possible that the pharaohs' families were lost to history due to a combination of factors, including war, natural disasters, and the rise of new empires. So, where is the bloodline of the pharaohs today? Well, the truth is that nobody knows for sure. Some believe that the royal bloodline died out with Cleopatra, the last active pharaoh, whose descendants died out in the early Roman Empire. Others believe that the bloodline survived and that there are still pharaohs alive today, just living under different names. Of course, there are also those who believe that the pharaohs were gods and that they never really died. The question of what happened to the pharaohs' bloodline is a fascinating one that has puzzled historians and geneticists alike. While there is no definitive answer, the journey to find out the truth is an exciting one that takes us back to the dawn of human civilization. As we continue to explore the mysteries of ancient Egypt, we may one day discover the fate of the pharaoh's bloodline. But until then, the question remains, where are the descendants of the pharaohs today? Well, guys, we've come to the end of this video, but don't worry, the journey doesn't have to end here. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of the mystery surrounding the pharaohs and their bloodline. And trust me, what we've uncovered so far is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore and so many more secrets to uncover. Speaking of uncovering secrets, let's take a moment to talk about the amazing technology used in this video. By using innovative AI tools, we've been able to analyze historical data and evidence in ways that were never before possible. These tools have allowed us to explore the pharaoh's bloodline like never before and to piece together their family tree with incredible accuracy. But enough about the tools. Let's get back to the mystery at hand. We've already covered a lot of ground in this video, but there's still so much more to uncover. From the hidden tombs of the Pharaohs' descendants to the latest genetic discoveries that shed light on their bloodline, we're going to continue to explore every possible lead in our quest to solve this enduring mystery. So, what are you waiting for? Join us on this incredible journey and be the first to know when we uncover the truth behind the Pharaoh's bloodline. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Together, we can solve one of history's greatest mysteries. Who knows, maybe you'll even discover that you're related to an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. That's right, you heard me correctly. Maybe you have the blood of kings flowing through your veins. As we continue our investigation, we'll be sure to keep you updated on all of our findings. So make sure to stay tuned. The journey begins with the first dynasties and the secret of how royal blood was protected, or lost. What do you think? Leave your theories in the comments below and join the discussion. Ancient Egyptian rulers. Royal inbreeding explained. Now, this question has been asked multiple times by viewers, and since it's a fascinating topic which also relates to ancient Egyptian history, I thought I should cover it in a video. What was the reason for all the royal incest that we see among the pharaohs? Is there an explanation for such a thing? And how come no one cared about genetic disorders at the time? All good questions. We have to start off with something basic. Why did the Egyptians practice incest? The answer is quite simple, actually. To keep the bloodline pure and the power within the family. Pharaohs had absolute authority over Egypt. They were considered gods on earth. By marrying within the family, they could ensure that the next ruler would be of the same bloodline, thus keeping their godlike status within the family. It was not only practiced by the Egyptians, but many other cultures throughout history like the Greeks and the Japanese, to name a few. The practice of brother-sister marriage was extremely common among the Egyptians. Many pharaohs married their own sisters. You might wonder why they didn't marry outside of their family. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't uncommon for women to marry their brothers. So why wouldn't they do the same within the royal family? But the thing to remember here is that during those times, the women's role was mainly that of a wife and mother. Once she gave birth to a male heir, her job was pretty much done. Some examples of royal sibling marriages are Pharaohs Ramses II and Nefertari, Thutmose III and his wife Hatshepsut, and Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti. Now, each of these unions produced a king after some years, which means that the bloodline remained within the family. There are many other examples that can be given, but these three are perhaps the most famous. However, there is another side to every coin. While brother-sister marriage was common, it wasn't always successful. Sometimes there were no heirs, which left the pharaohs desperate. In such cases, they either took another wife from outside the family or married someone else, usually a female relative. This led to more inbreeding later on. So you can imagine how it must have been in those situations. You see, siblings were preferred to be married because they shared 50% of their DNA. This meant that the bloodline would remain strong and healthy. If a pharaoh married someone outside of the family, there was always the chance that the bloodline might become weak or that the next ruler might not be considered divine. Another factor to consider is that the ancient Egyptians believed that a pharaoh's wife was required to bear him an heir. She wasn't considered to be a good queen if she couldn't bear children. This put a lot of pressure on the women, and they were often blamed if they couldn't produce a son. Now, I am not saying that the men were never held accountable, but it was almost always the woman's fault. For example, in the case of King Tut, his mother, Queen Hetepheres, had several failed pregnancies before giving birth to him. This may be the reason why she married one of her son's uncles, the future Pharaoh A, after Tut's death. So, as you can see, there were many factors which led to the practice of royal incest among the ancient Egyptians. Did they know about the consequences of such a thing? Was it even a problem for them? As I said earlier, the Egyptians weren't really concerned with the whole genetic disorder thing. In fact, they didn't even know what genes were. The concept of genetics was developed by Gregor Mendel in the 19th century. Before that, people didn't really understand how genetic traits were transmitted. The Egyptians believed that a child inherited traits from both parents equally. They didn't realize that one parent could pass on a genetic trait to their offspring without showing it themselves. This is known as recessive inheritance. If you want to learn more about genetics, I suggest you watch some videos about it. Anyway, while the ancient Egyptians didn't know about genetics, they were aware that certain traits were more likely to appear in children if both parents had them. For example, if a woman had red hair, she knew that her children were more likely to have red hair as well. However, they didn't understand the concept of dominant and recessive genes. There are many examples of genetic disorders that can occur when two carriers of a recessive gene mate. Cystic fibrosis is a disorder that causes the buildup of thick, sticky mucus in the lungs, pancreas, and other organs. It is caused by a mutation in the CFTR gene. Carriers of the disease have one normal gene and one mutated gene. When two carriers have a child, there is a 25% chance that the child will inherit two mutated genes and develop cystic fibrosis. Another example is sickle cell anemia, which is a disorder of the red blood cells. It is caused by a mutation in the HBB gene. Carriers of the disease have one normal gene and one mutated gene. When two carriers have a child, there is a 25% chance that the child will inherit two mutated genes and develop sickle cell anemia. The ancient Egyptians didn't know about any of this, but they were aware that certain traits were more likely to appear in children if both parents had them. For example, they knew that blue eyes were more likely to be passed on if both parents had blue eyes. But they didn't understand the concept of dominant and recessive genes. Did they suffer from any genetic disorders? Well, perhaps. but we don't really know because most of the evidence has been lost to time. The ancient Egyptians didn't keep detailed records of their genetic history, so it's impossible to say for sure. It is interesting to note that many of the pharaohs who engaged in incestuous relationships died young. King Tut, for example, died at the age of 19. Some believe that he suffered from a genetic disorder known as achondroplasia, which causes dwarfism. King Tut's skeleton was examined in the early 20th century, and it was found that he was indeed shorter than average. However, it is also possible that he was misdiagnosed. After all, the examination was carried out over 100 years ago, and medical technology has come a long way since then. So, did the Egyptians know about the dangers of incest? Perhaps they did, but they were willing to take the risk in order to keep the bloodline pure. Or perhaps they didn't know about the dangers at all, and they were just doing what they thought was normal. Unfortunately, we will never know for sure. As you can see, there are many theories about the Egyptians and their practices, but in reality, we don't have much evidence to go on. All we can do is speculate and draw our own conclusions. In conclusion, the ancient Egyptians did engage in a lot of incestuous relationships, but it's hard to say whether or not they knew about the dangers involved. Perhaps they did know, but didn't care. Perhaps they didn't know at all. Either way, we will never know for sure. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Now, while we may never know the full truth about the Egyptians and their practices, what we do know is that their legacy lives on. From the pyramids to the Sphinx, their monuments still stand as a testament to their ingenuity and power, and even after thousands of years, their stories continue to captivate us. But what happens when a dynasty ends? Where does the lineage flow when the throne is empty? Like, seriously, where does it go? Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, but she wasn't actually Egyptian. She was Greek. Her ancestors were part of a dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great. His empire broke up 300 years before Christ, but they didn't last forever. And when Cleopatra died, the country fell under Roman rule. And although her bloodline may have ended, some people think there could still be descendants of Cleopatra living today. Let's look at what history has to say about Cleopatra's children and whether any of them could still be alive. It all started when Cleopatra met the Roman general and future dictator Julius Caesar. He came to Alexandria in 48 BC because he had just defeated Pompey, his former ally who had fled to Egypt. According to Plutarch, Caesar and Cleopatra first saw each other at a party hosted by King Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra's father. Cleopatra wanted to impress Caesar, so she had herself lowered into the king's banquet hall on a golden chariot while being fanned by attendants to make it look like she was actually a goddess descending from the sky. Later, they would meet again in Caesar's war room, where Cleopatra would give him a tour of the Egyptian exhibits. Plutarch wrote that Caesar was stunned by her intellect and beauty. It's said that this encounter is what sparked their romance. They would have a son together named Caesarion, also known as Ptolemy XV, whose birth date is believed to have been in 47 BC. This made him around 13 years old when Cleopatra died. According to Plutarch, Caesar considered Caesarion to be his legitimate heir and left him money in his will, though it's debated how much influence Caesar actually had over his political allies back in Rome. When Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and eventual Emperor Augustus, took power, he declared Caesarion illegitimate and seized the fortune that Caesar had left him. Caesarion was only 19 years old when he met his end. According to the historian Suetonius, Augustus ordered him to be put to death on the orders of his grandmother, Cleopatra's mother, and the woman Suetonius believed was really behind the fall of Cleopatra and her kingdom. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators. After hearing this news, Cleopatra and Caesarion went into mourning. It's said that Cleopatra dressed like a man and rode horseback alongside Caesar's funeral procession from Rome to Athens. According to Plutarch, during this time, Cleopatra attracted the attention of the Roman triumvir Mark Antony, who would later become one of her lovers. He sent her a crown that contained 4 sphinxes and was engraved with the words, "To the Queen of the Gods." Although Cleopatra and Caesarion were in Greece at the time, Caesarion would visit Mark Antony and his wife Octavia in Italy. According to the Roman poet Horace, both Caesarion and his older sister, Cleopatra Selene, were present at Mark Antony's wedding to Octavia. Cleopatra Selene was the daughter of Cleopatra and a previous lover of Mark Antony's, King Ptolemy XII. Soon after, Mark Antony would declare Cleopatra and her children to be the new rulers of Rome and set out to legitimize their claim through a series of decrees. This would anger his ally Octavian, who would eventually start a civil war against him. During the conflict, Mark Antony would send Cleopatra and their children away to Alexandria for safety. In 32 BC, Mark Antony would lose the war and flee to Alexandria, where he and Cleopatra would take their own lives. Cleopatra's death has become one of the most famous stories in history. According to Plutarch, she allowed an Egyptian cobra to bite her so that she wouldn't have to be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains as a captive of Octavian. Now let's talk about what happened to Cleopatra's children. History tells us that Caesarion was killed at age 19 or 20, likely by order of Augustus. However, there's no real record of how Cleopatra's daughters met their end. According to the Roman historian Appian, Cleopatra had 2 daughters with Mark Antony. Their names were Cleopatra and Iris, sometimes called Irene. Unlike her brother, both of these sisters were full-blooded Egyptians. They would have looked more Egyptian than even Cleopatra, their mother, since she herself had Greek ancestry. These sisters were said to have been born in 37 and 36 BC, respectively. They would have been teenagers when their parents died. Around the same time, it's thought that Cleopatra, the elder, married her brother, Ptolemy XV. Their union was supposedly blessed by a prophecy that predicted that one of their children would become ruler of Egypt. The couple may have had a son, but there's very little evidence for this, and it's uncertain if he survived the fall of Cleopatra's dynasty. We know that Cleopatra, the younger, did not marry her brother because the prophet predicted that she would be the one to deal the final blow to her family line. According to the accounts of Appian and Cassius Dio, after Cleopatra and Mark Antony learned that Octavian was marching on their capital, they planned to escape to India. But on the way, Cleopatra took her own life and left Iris and her brother Ptolemy alone. They attempted to flee to India themselves, but on the journey, it's believed that Iris gave birth and then either she or her child died. Some modern theories say that her son was killed when pirates attacked the ship carrying him and his nurse. Either way, this would have taken place when Iris was around 20 years old. Afterwards, she supposedly fled to Persia with her brother. There she became the wife of King Herod the Great, best known for his role in the massacre of innocents and the building of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. However, according to Josephus, Herod and Iris did not have any children together, and instead adopted a son named Antipater IV, who was the son of a previous marriage that Iris had. But now, let's turn to modern theories about Cleopatra's descendants. It's important to note that these are just theories and there's no proof to support them. If Cleopatra's bloodline survived, where did it go? Some believe the heirs of Egypt are closer than we imagine. Some believe Cleopatra's daughter Cleopatra, the elder, escaped to India with her mother and lived out the remainder of her life there. Yet others believe that she and her husband Ptolemy XV actually did produce a son and establish a hidden bloodline. One theory claims that Cleopatra and Ptolemy traveled to Ethiopia, where they disguised themselves as ordinary people and lived out their days in hiding. According to this theory, Cleopatra's descendants would live in Ethiopia until the 17th century, when one of them would leave the country and travel to France, where they would eventually die out. Other theories suggest that Cleopatra's bloodline might have ended with Iris and her son, or they may have survived through her brother, Ptolemy. Still, Others believe that Cleopatra's daughter Cleopatra, the younger, actually did manage to escape to India and become the wife of King Herod. But if this is true, why didn't any of her descendants hold any titles or positions of power? Herod and Cleopatra, the supposed descendant of Cleopatra, had 4 sons, but none of them held the title of Pharaoh. This seems odd if Cleopatra's daughter was actually the Queen of Egypt. According to Josephus, Cleopatra was a very beautiful woman with large and brilliant eyes. Could it be that her features were too Egyptian to be obvious that she was related to the famous queen? Maybe. Or perhaps her lineage was kept secret for another reason. There is a possibility that Cleopatra's bloodline survived through one of her brothers. Cleopatra had 3 brothers, all of whom were named Ptolemy. 2 of them died before Cleopatra, and the youngest was killed by Augustus. But what if one of her brothers managed to survive? Unfortunately, we don't have any records to confirm or deny this theory. We do know that the last official pharaoh of ancient Egypt was Cleopatra Selene. She and her brother Ptolemy XV shared the throne for around 5 years until Ptolemy died, and she was forced to marry her brother Ptolemy XIII. After that, she disappeared from the historical record. But what if Cleopatra Selene and her sister Cleopatra, the elder, managed to have children and secretly continued their bloodline? According to the historian Edward Lipinski, Cleopatra Selene may have had a son with a Roman senator named Gaius Vibius Pansa Catronianus. If this is true, Cleopatra's bloodline would have survived through her daughter Cleopatra, the elder, and it's possible that her descendants would have settled in Rome and eventually spread throughout Europe. Pansochronius died in 23 BC, and his widow outlived him by many years. If Cleopatra Selene did have a son with him, he would have been close to Augustus in age. As mentioned earlier, Augustus declared Caesarion illegitimate and appropriated his fortune. Perhaps he did this because he knew that if Caesarion had any legitimate descendants, they would be his rivals for power. Any potential descendants of Cleopatra Selene and Caesarion would have been executed along with any of their relatives that Augustus suspected knew of their existence. If this is true, it's no wonder why there are no records of them. While the idea that Cleopatra's bloodline may have survived through one of her sons is popular, the idea that it survived through her daughters is far less common. Most sources state clearly that Cleopatra had 2 daughters, and there's no evidence that either of them had children. While this does seem to spell the end of Cleopatra's bloodline, it doesn't mean that her descendants are beyond saving. While it's possible that Caesarion, Cleopatra, Selene, and Cleopatra, the younger, all died before having any children, there's a chance that they all managed to have kids and simply kept a low profile afterwards. It's also possible that Cleopatra Selene, the last official pharaoh of Egypt, had a secret son, and that her bloodline survived through him. And finally, it's possible that one of Cleopatra's brothers, whom history tells us was killed by Augustus, actually managed to escape and live out the rest of his life in hiding. The truth is, we simply don't know what happened to Cleopatra's family after they lost their throne. And that's why these theories persist. What do you think? Do you think Cleopatra had descendants who live among us today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered if you could be related to an ancient pharaoh? Maybe you have some mysterious exotic ancestry that's been hidden for thousands of years, waiting for modern science to uncover it. Well, it turns out that we can actually test this theory because scientists have managed to sequence the DNA of several Egyptian mummies, including some of the most famous ones from throughout history. And what they found is both shocking and fascinating. So let's explore the traces of pharaohs we can find in our own DNA. The first step in this process was simply getting a sample from these mummies. You can't just walk up to a museum exhibit and slice off a bit of the mummy to run a test. So instead, scientists relied on samples taken during non-invasive research conducted in the early 2010s. Scientists were able to extract enough viable DNA from King Tut's remains to sequence his genome, which gave them a lot of information about his ancestry. They found that he had two main haplogroups, or genetic lineages, that are passed down generation by generation. One linked him to Europe and the other to the Middle East. This means that even back in Tutankhamun's day, the Egyptians got around a bit, which is not surprising when you consider how much cultural exchange happened along the Nile River throughout history. And speaking of Ramses III, we actually have another genetic goldmine to work with. He was famously the victim of an assassination, or at least that's what the history books say. There have always been doubts surrounding this, however, because Ramses III was believed to have died of natural causes rather than foul play. His death would have been pretty unnatural if it was murder. You see, the victim would have had to have been stabbed multiple times in the back, which was not something the Egyptians did to each other, since they believed that doing so would desecrate the body and disturb the balance between the living and the dead. Nonetheless, Ramses III was found buried with a dagger in his chest, which would seem to indicate that he was indeed killed. And the wounds on his skeleton do seem to line up with reports of the incident written by ancient historians. But the timeline doesn't quite add up. According to the records, Ramses III was attacked by one of his own sons. But this couldn't have happened because according to the DNA evidence, he was actually too closely related to everyone in his dynasty to have children of his own. Turns out, Ramses III was actually the victim of a double incest, sired by his uncle and raised believing he was his father's son. So far, all of this information might seem like a bit of an academic exercise, but there's more to it than that. Studying the DNA of these mummies has given us an unprecedented glimpse into the lives of ordinary people living in ancient Egypt. For example, researchers recently discovered the presence of two rare haplogroups among the mummies, one of which is virtually unknown today except among a single population in Central Egypt. The other is shared by modern Egyptians and people from the Middle East, but it hasn't been found in any other ancient samples. These two haplogroups represent just a fraction of the genetic diversity that existed in ancient Egypt, and their presence suggests that the country was home to a wide range of different people from all over the world. In fact, this is the first time we've been able to say anything concrete about the everyday Egyptians who aren't the pharaohs or the people who lived along the Nile. This is thanks to the discovery of a tomb in the city of Akhmim that dates back to the late New Kingdom or early late period, somewhere between 1290 and 664 BC. Inside the tomb was a collection of human remains, including those of a woman and her two adult sons. Their skeletons showed signs of a close family relationship, so they were probably mother and sons, which meant that researchers could tell the difference between male and female DNA without having to excavate the remains further. By studying the mitochondrial DNA, or the DNA passed down maternally from mother to child, researchers were able to trace their maternal lineage back to two different haplogroups. One of these haplogroups is now extremely rare, found only among a small number of people living in Central Egypt today. The other haplogroup is more common, but it still tells us a lot about the people who lived in ancient Egypt. It's shared by modern Egyptians from all over the country, as well as people from the Middle East, North Africa, and the Caucasus region. This suggests that ancient Egypt was a melting pot of cultures long before Alexander the Great came along and introduced even more diversity to the region. The people who lived here came from all over the known world, and they brought their genetic material with them. To put this into context, think about how diverse the United States is today. People from all over the globe have come to call this place home, and they've brought their traditions, their foods, and their genes with them. In many ways, the U.S. is a microcosm of the world, and in many ways, ancient Egypt was too. These findings are particularly exciting because they suggest that there may be genetic evidence for the biblical story of the Exodus. According to the Bible, Moses led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, but most historians have dismissed this story as nothing more than a myth. However, if we can find genetic evidence for the Exodus, it would prove that this event really did happen. That's why researchers are so excited about the discovery of these two rare haplogroups. Could they be related to the Israelites who fled Egypt? It's too early to say for sure, but it's certainly possible. As researchers continue to study the DNA of these mummies, they hope to learn even more about the people who lived in ancient Egypt. For example, they want to know whether there was more than one group of people who contributed their genes to the population. They also want to learn more about the two rare haplogroups and where exactly they came from. Perhaps one day we will even find genetic evidence for the biblical story of the Exodus. But what does all this mean for you and me? Could it be that the blood of the pharaohs still runs through ordinary people today? The answer is maybe. If your ancestors came from Egypt or the Middle East, it's possible that you carry some of the same genetic markers as these mummies. However, it's important to remember that everyone's genetic makeup is unique. Even if you don't have any Egyptian ancestry, you may still share some of the same genes as these mummies. After all, we're all human beings, and we all share a common ancestor. So, who knows? You might have some ancient Egyptian DNA in you. Just because we haven't discovered it yet doesn't mean it's not there. We're just beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible with DNA analysis. As technology improves, we'll be able to learn even more about our ancient relatives and the incredible journey they took across the globe. Who knows what other secrets they'll share with us in the years to come? What do you think? Are you excited about the prospect of learning more about your ancient relatives? Who are the true descendants of Cleopatra? Where is the lost bloodline of the pharaohs today? Are there any pharaohs alive today? A lot of questions we will answer in this video, so be sure to watch until the end. Who are the true descendants of Cleopatra? According to researchers, these people could be her direct heirs. The most convincing evidence for who Cleopatra's true heirs are can be found in Egypt itself. Here we meet the Coptic Christians. Many historians believe that the Coptics descend directly from the ancient Egyptians, and the Coptics also have legends that say just that. According to Coptic tradition, when the Roman Emperor Augustus declared himself the first Roman emperor after the time of the Republic, he did so with the consent of the high priest of the Egyptian gods, a man named Joseph. And Joseph was supposedly none other than Joseph, the son of Jacob from the Bible. And that would mean that all the later pharaohs of Egypt were related to the biblical Joseph. Researchers also point out that the Coptics have always been careful to preserve their traditions and rituals, which means that the Coptics could very well have preserved customs and rituals from the time of the pharaohs. Not only that, but according to legend, Cleopatra had a son after her famous affair with Julius Caesar. The boy's name was Ptolemy, but he didn't make it to adulthood. If he had lived, he would now be in direct line of descent from Cleopatra. But according to the legends, the child was killed by Cleopatra's sister and co-ruler, Arsinoe IV. But let's take a look at the genetic evidence as well. Researchers compared DNA from various mummies, including the remains of King Tut and a woman who may have been his mother, as well as from modern Egyptians. The results showed that the Coptic Egyptians in Upper Egypt have the closest genetic ties to the ancient Egyptians. In addition, according to a study published in 2021, the Coptics seem to have maintained the highest level of genetic continuity over the past 3,000 years. This is because they have been in Egypt for so long and because they have had so few external influences. The Coptics have been cut off from the rest of the world for thousands of years, and they have had so few outside influences that some researchers even believe that the Coptics may have preserved genetic material from the time of the pharaohs. However, there is another group of people in Egypt who claim to be the true heirs of the pharaohs. These are the Nubians. The Nubians live in southern Egypt and northern Sudan. Already during the time of the pharaohs, there were Nubian kingdoms along the Nile. The Nubians also had close connections to the pharaohs. For example, one of Egypt's most famous female pharaohs, Hatshepsut, was of Nubian descent. But the Nubians were also conquerors. In the 8th century BC, the Nubians took over Egypt themselves and established the kingdom of Kush. The Nubian rulers were called kings of Egypt and wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Nubians ruled Egypt for about a century before the Assyrians conquered them. Still, the Nubians continued to be a force to be reckoned with. and in the 4th century AD they rose again to conquer Egypt. At that time, however, they no longer called themselves pharaohs, but rather kings. They ruled Egypt for the next 3 centuries until the Arab conquest. In the Middle Ages, the Nubians gradually disappeared from history. However, already in the 19th century, European explorers rediscovered the Nubians in Sudan. Today, about 20 million Nubians live in Egypt and Sudan. And, like the Coptics, the Nubians also have traditions that link them directly to the pharaohs. The Nubians still live in the traditional way, preserving their own language and culture. It is also believed that the Nubians have preserved many secrets of the pharaohs. For example, the Nubians have ancient burial grounds where the dead were mummified in the same way as the pharaohs. And in some cases, the mummies have also been placed in stone coffins. But the Nubians' greatest treasure is said to be hidden in plain sight. This is the supposed secret bloodline of Cleopatra. Maybe the Nubians actually carry the pharaoh's blood in their veins. But if the Nubians and the Coptics are the true heirs of the pharaohs, then what about Europe's aristocracy? You see, most people know that Cleopatra had a son with Julius Caesar named Caesarion. But fewer people know that she also had a son with Mark Antony, and his name was Ptolemy. Cleopatra hoped that her son with Mark Antony would become the next pharaoh, but that didn't happen. Octavian, who later became the Emperor Augustus, had Caesar and Cleopatra executed and made himself the ruler of Egypt. However, there are theories that certain European aristocratic families actually descend from Cleopatra through her son Ptolemy. The most famous of these families is the Italian House of Medici. The Medici were a powerful family during the Renaissance. They ruled Florence for centuries and were extremely rich. But the Medici also had connections to the papacy and the royal houses of Europe. Cosimo de' Medici was even called the 7th monarch by the chronicler of the time, Michael Scott. The Medici coat of arms also shows that the family saw itself as descended from royalty. Their coat of arms displayed a golden crown on a red background. But how exactly the Medici were related to Cleopatra is unknown. Some sources claim that the Medici descend from Cleopatra through her son Ptolemy. Others say that the connection is much further back in time. According to some sources, the Medici are descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. If this is true, then the Medici would have been related to Cleopatra by marriage. But the Medici aren't the only European family with alleged connections to Cleopatra. There are rumors that the British royal family also descends from Cleopatra, but through her son, Caesar. According to this theory, Caesar would have had a son after his assassination, a son named Caesar Octavius. Octavius would then have fled to Britain with the help of Caesar's assassins. There, he would start a new dynasty of kings. But this theory is questionable at best, since Octavius would have been only 2 years old when Caesar was assassinated. According to Cassius Dio, Octavius was raised in Rome by his father's will. Even if Octavius had gone to Britain, he wouldn't have become king. Back then, the British tribes were ruled by a kind of tribal council. Only later, after the arrival of the Romans, would the British kingship develop. What is certain is that the British royal family has always liked to emphasize its ancient origins. The British royals claim to descend from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, just like the Medici. But the British royals also claim to be descended from a legendary Trojan king named Brutus. The story goes that Brutus, who was of royal Trojan descent, arrived in Britain with 3,000 warriors and founded the British monarchy. But these stories are nothing but myths. Neither the Queen of Sheba nor King Solomon had any real children, and the stories about the Trojan Brutus are nothing more than a mix of legend and fiction. The truth is that the origin of the British monarchy is lost in the mists of time. The oldest accounts of the British kings go back to the 11th century. By that time, the British monarchy had existed for several hundred years. But even the oldest written records are often more legend than facts. So it's impossible to say with certainty how the British royal family came into being. However, one thing is certain. The British royal family has always emphasized its ancient origins. probably to legitimize its rule. But what if the blood of the pharaohs flows in completely unexpected veins today? What if Cleopatra's true heirs are not the Nubians or the Coptics or some European aristocrats? What if her true heirs can be found among us ordinary people? Well, it's possible. After all, Cleopatra lived in a time when Egypt was a province of Rome, a time when many people from all over the empire traveled to Egypt. Traders, pilgrims, and soldiers must have come to the city of Alexandria alone in the thousands every year. It's entirely possible that someone from the common people fell in love with Cleopatra, and that she had a secret affair with a commoner that resulted in children. If this is true, then the blood of the pharaohs could literally be flowing through the streets of Alexandria and Cairo today. So, who are the true descendants of Cleopatra? Did she have any sons after her death? The question remains unanswered. What is certain is that the true heirs of Cleopatra most likely do not wear crowns, but their blood carries an ancient legacy. Pharaohs are among the most enduring figures in human history. Their blood is said to hold great power, granting immortality, power, and perhaps even divine favor. But where are they now? Did the line end with Cleopatra, or is there a royal heir waiting in the shadows? Join me as we explore this and more in today's episode. Ancient Egypt was a civilization unlike any other. It lasted for thousands of years, leaving behind monuments that are still standing strong. They believed that their pharaohs were gods among men, chosen by the gods to rule over the land of the River Nile. For centuries, the pharaohs held immense power, wealth, and influence. They commanded vast armies, controlled the economy, and were considered to be the intermediaries between the human and divine realms. The blood of the pharaohs was seen as sacred, carrying the essence of the gods within it. This belief was so ingrained in society that even after the pharaoh's death, their blood was carefully preserved and passed down through generations. According to ancient Egyptian beliefs, the pharaoh's blood contained the Ka, the vital force that animated the body and gave it life. This belief led to the mummification process, which was designed to preserve the body and allow the Ka to remain within it. During the mummification process, the organs were removed from the body and placed in separate containers, while the blood was carefully drained and saved for later use. The blood was then mixed with various substances, including honey, spices, and precious metals, and stored in canopic jars alongside the organs. These canopic jars were then placed within the tomb, allowing the pharaoh's blood to rest in peace alongside them. The pharaoh's blood was also used in religious ceremonies, such as the opening of the mouth ritual, which was performed during the mummification process. The blood was sprinkled on the mummy in order to bring it to life and allow the Ka to enter it. It was also used in offerings to the gods, as well as in rituals designed to protect the pharaoh from harm. In addition to its religious significance, the pharaoh's blood was also seen as a symbol of their divine kingship. The bloodline of the pharaohs was believed to be descended from the gods themselves, and their blood was said to contain the essence of those divine ancestors. This belief led to the development of a hereditary monarchy, as the throne was seen as passing from god to god through the pharaoh's bloodline. The pharaoh's blood was also used to connect them to their people. During the annual festival of Opet, the pharaoh would wear a special headdress that was lined with the blood of a bull. This was seen as a way of connecting the pharaoh to the god Amun, as well as to the people of Egypt. Overall, the pharaoh's blood was a highly revered substance in ancient Egyptian society. It was seen as sacred, powerful, and a symbol of the pharaoh's divine kingship and connection to their people. From preserving it during mummification to using it in religious ceremonies and offerings, every drop of the pharaoh's blood was treated with the utmost respect and reverence. But what if the pharaoh's blood had the power to grant immortality? What if their bloodline continues to flow through our veins even today? Let's dive into the myths and legends surrounding the pharaoh's blood. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the pharaoh was believed to be the embodiment of the god Horus on earth, When the pharaoh died, their soul would join the gods in the afterlife. However, there was one catch. The pharaoh's soul could only join the gods if their bloodline continued. This led to the belief that the pharaoh's blood had the power to grant immortality, both for the pharaoh themselves and for their descendants. The pharaohs who believed this would often have multiple wives and children, ensuring that their bloodline would continue long after they were gone. They would also engage in rituals and ceremonies designed to strengthen their bloodline and ensure its continuation. As the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra famously took her own life rather than be captured by the Roman Empire. Before doing so, she reportedly had her children, Ptolemy and Caesarion, drink from a cup of her blood in order to ensure the continuation of their bloodline. According to legend, this act granted them immortality, although history tells a different tale. But let's take a step back and look at how the idea of the pharaohs' blood-granting immortality became part of popular culture. One prominent example is the 1999 film The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. In the film, the main character, Rick O'Connell, is searching for the mythical crown of the Nile. The crown is said to be cursed, and anyone who wears it becomes immortal, forever trapped in a state of undeath. While this is a work of fiction, it reflects the enduring fascination with the idea of the pharaoh's blood and its supposed powers. Another example is the Dungeons & Dragons series, which features a character named Raistlin Mayere. Raistlin is a powerful wizard who is dying of a mysterious illness. To save his life, his brother Caramon takes him on a quest to find the blood of an ancient dragon. The blood is said to have powerful healing properties, and when Raistlin drinks it, he is cured of his illness and becomes immortal. Once again, this is a work of fiction, but it plays into the same themes of immortality and the pharaoh's blood that have captured the public imagination for centuries. There are also many conspiracy theories that surround the pharaoh's bloodline. One theory claims that the bloodline survived the fall of the Egyptian Empire, and that there are still descendants of the pharaohs living in the world today. Proponents of this theory believe that the pharaohs possessed secret knowledge about immortality, and that they were able to pass this knowledge down through their bloodline. Others believe that the pharaoh's bloodline is connected to ancient bloodlines around the world, such as the Merovingian dynasty of France or the Romanov family of Russia. According to these theories, the blood of the pharaohs is somehow present in the DNA of these royal families, granting them special powers or knowledge. While there is no evidence to support these claims, they continue to circulate in fringe circles. But whether or not the pharaoh's bloodline still exists in the world today, their legacy lives on in our imaginations. The idea of the pharaoh's blood has captured the human imagination for centuries and continues to inspire stories, myths, and legends. The pharaohs may have vanished from the mortal realm, but in myths, in genes, and in dreams, their blood still flows. The heirs of Egypt may be closer than we think. Perhaps within us all lies a drop of the pharaoh's blood, a reminder of the eternal mysteries of the ancient world. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to hear your thoughts on the pharaoh's bloodline. Do you believe that their blood still flows through our veins today? Or do you think that the pharaoh's legacy ended with Cleopatra? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more historical tales. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, may your days be merry and bright, and may the pharaohs favor you with their everlasting light.